Well, hello. I want to welcome everybody to today's lecture by Dr. Ellen Prager. I'm Dennis Hanasak, a research professor here at Harvard Branch and host of the series. Our next monthly virtual lecture will be on June 16th, also a Wednesday at 4 p.m. The lecture is entitled Update on Manatee Mortality Events in the Indian River Lagoon. It'll be presented by Dr. Martine DeWitt from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or FWC for short. Many of you know, I think everyone knows, the Indian River Lagoon is one of the most biologically diverse estuaries in the nation and an important habitat to the threatened Florida manatees. And FWC's Manatee Carcass program documents manatee mortality through a rigorous verification process and monitors manatee health through necropsies. And I think a lot of you know, it's been in the news quite a lot this year, there is a very high mortality of manatees in Florida this year, much above normal. And a lot of that is happening right here in the lagoon. And a lot of it appears to be starvation. And the hypothesis is that it has to do with loss of seagrasses that most of you know about. So this presentation will summarize scientifically what is known about manatee mortality investigations and discuss health threats related to the loss of seagrass in the lagoon. So I think this will be a very, very timely presentation. Now, before I introduce today's speakers, I want to mention something. It's kind of sad, but at the same time, I think it's a time for us to appreciate a very special person, and that person is Dr. Mary Rice, who passed away last week. Mary came to Harvard Branch as a Smithsonian scientist in 1972. So that was just 1 year after Harvard Branch was founded. She became the founding director of the Smithsonian Marine Station, which remained here at Harvard Branch until 1999, when Mary culminated years of planning for a new Smithsonian Marine Station lab on Seaway Drive down in Fort Pierce. This successful move to new facilities further enhanced the station's capabilities, led to a significant increase in its research staff, and made the public much more aware of the station's valuable work. Mary retired in 2002 and was named Senior Research Scientist Emeritus at the Smithsonian Marine Station. And Mary continued to conduct research, even though she was retired, on her beloved sipunculate worms, very specialized worms, for almost 2 decades. Mary's dream of a marine station focused on the biodiversity of the Indian River Lagoon, and her outstanding execution benefit the lives and research of generations of scientists and students, and will continue to do so for years to come. So I just want to thank Mary for all of us here at Harvard Branch and her colleagues really worldwide. So now it's a pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Ellen Prager. Ellen is a well-respected marine scientist and author, widely recognized for her expertise and ability to bring science to the layperson. She currently works as a freelance writer, chief scientist for Storm Center Communications, and science advisor to celebrity cruises in the Galapagos Islands. Ellen received her bachelor's degree from Wesleyan University, Connecticut. Her master's degree was from the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science, and her Ph.D. was from Louisiana State University. She's had an incredible career. Some of her previous positions include teaching oceanography for the Sea Education Association. She was a geological researcher for the U.S. Geological Survey. She was chief scientist for the Aquarius Reef-based program in Key Largo, Florida, which is the world's only undersea research station. She was assistant dean at the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences. She has participated on many research expeditions to a lot of really cool places. So, for example, the Galapagos Islands, Papua New Guinea, the Caribbean, the Bahamas, and the deep waters of the Florida Reef Tract. She's a frequently requested speaker for public-oriented events and appears on air as an expert for the media, having appeared on the Today Show, NBC News, Good Morning America, CNN, Weather Channel, and so on. Throughout her career, Ellen has always focused her efforts on developing innovative ways to share her passion for the oceans and the environment with others. And that includes writing children's books, which has brought her here today for what I think is Ellen's 4th lecture in our series over a number of years. Most recently, though, was just in December 2019 when she kicked off this series of books. So let's welcome back Dr. Ellen Prager, who will speak today on Wonders of Greenland, Holy Giant Iceberg. And I hope I said holy, I didn't put enough exclamation point on that because it's really Holy Giant Iceberg.
Excellent.
Oh, here's Ellen.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And thank you to Harbor Branch and to the sponsors of the programs for inviting me back. It's always such a pleasure to be at Harbor Branch. And, you know, just as we all know, I'm just sorry I can't be there in person, but maybe sometime soon. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. I put together some images for you. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Make sure I've got everything correct. You should be good to go. Okay, there we go. So yes, and Dennis was right. You have to say, holy giant iceberg. So a little bit of background about why I'm going to be talking about Greenland. As Dennis says, I have been writing sort of adventure books for middle graders that I combine science and learning about nature with action and humor. And the first book in the series, called The Wonderlist Adventures, was Escape Galapagos. And then when I was deciding what would be the location for the second book, Greenland turned out to be the ideal location. So just the premise behind the books is that there's a family, a father and two kids, Ezzy and Luke, and unfortunately the mother, who was an adventurous marine geologist, sounds familiar. Unfortunately, though, has passed away. But in her honor, the father, Dr. Schuyler, has promised to take his two kids to all the places on her wonder list, all the wonderful places in nature that she always wanted to see. And the first was the Galapagos. And the second, turns out, it was Ilulissat, Greenland. So you might wonder, why did I choose Ilulissat, Greenland? So I'm going to show you why. Let's talk about where, first of all, just to remind you all where Greenland is. And specifically, we're going to go to the western coast of Greenland, as I said, a place called Ilulissat. And it is about almost halfway up on the west coast of Greenland. And in this Landsat image, somebody asked me the other day why it looks pink. That's just devegetated land. There's no real vegetation, not much vegetation on there. That's all sort of rocky area. But here you can see Ilulissat, which is this little town up sort of just north of where this glacier and fjord lets out into the sea, a place called Disco Bay. And so you have the big ice sheet, you have a glacier, which is also known as the Jacobsen Glacier, and then you have the Kangia Ice Fjord, and that goes out into the ocean. This is a hotspot in climate change research. It's one of the fastest flowing glaciers in the world, and it's a place where scientists from across the globe go to study how big ice sheets, glaciers, and ice shelves melt, because during climate change, they're all melting. But the last time this happened, nobody here was here to see it. So there's a lot of things about how big ice sheets and glaciers melt that we don't really understand. So this is one of the places where scientists go to get a better handle on that. And again, not only is it one of the fastest flowing glaciers, it is also retreating very quickly. And this picture here shows where the front of the glacier was over time. And you can see we call it retreat because it's retreating inland due to melting. So again, scientists go here to try and figure out what are all the processes that are at work causing that retreat or melting. And things like calving of the front of the ice shelf, which creates icebergs, meltwater draining down through the glacier and what are called big moulins. I'm going to talk a little bit more. That's the picture on the right. But also you get melting underneath the ice sheet when you get ocean currents bringing relatively warm water under the glacier and under the ice shelf. So all of these processes together are working to melt the glacier and the ice shelf. And again, it's something that scientists don't understand that well. So they go to Ilulissat and the nearby glacier to study it. It is also a place where there was a movie, if any of you saw it, called Chasing Ice, where they filmed the largest calving event ever. Now, if you guys have your sound on, I'm sure you do.
I'm on the phone
Turn it
with
up
Jim on one of our
and
regular
listen and
check-ins.
watch this.
Jim,
It's amazing.
nothing's happening.
This was filmed for the movie Chasing Ice, and this
It's
is
going well.
at that same
We had,
glacier.
some serious bouts of wind.
Turn up your
Other than
volume.
that, things are fairly well set up here. We've got some continuous time lapse going.
It's starting, Adam. I think. Adam, it's starting.
Oh wait, Jim.
They had no idea this was going to
The
happen.
big piece is starting to cast. Let me call you back.
Call him back. Okay, bye.
Still going?
Yeah, in that V section right there. Look at that big bird rolling. All four running, right?
Yeah. Look at that. You see how? Look at the whole thing.
Calving face is 300, sometimes 400 feet tall. Pieces of ice were shooting up out of the ocean 600 feet and then falling. The only way that you can really try to put it into scale with human reference is if you imagine Manhattan. And all of a sudden, all of those buildings just start to rumble and quake and peel off and just fall over and roll around. This whole massive city just breaking apart in front of your eyes. We're just observers, these two little dots on the side of the mountain. And we watched and recorded the largest witness calving event ever caught on tape.
So how big was this calving event that we just looked at? We'll resort to some illustrations again to give you a sense of scale. It's as if the entire lower tip of Manhattan broke off, except that the thickness, the height of it, is equivalent to buildings that are 2.5 or 3 times higher than they are. That's a magical, miraculous, horrible, scary thing. I don't know that anybody's really seen the miracle and horror of that. It took 100 years for it to retreat 8 miles from 1900 to 2000. From 2000 to 2010, it retreated 9 miles. So in 10 years, it retreated more than it had in the previous 100.
So I hope you're all saying, wow, that was incredible. So this happened at the same place that I was talking about called Ilulissat, Greenland on the Jacobsen Glacier. So when I decided to write a book about what we wish we knew about climate change and some other science, I decided I had to go to Ilulissat to see it for myself. And so that was what started me with this whole fascination with Greenland, and how I decided to use it for the background of the story for the second book in the series called Escape Greenland, which sort of has an underlying theme of climate change. So I'm now going to show you what it's like to travel to Ilulissat, what the area is like, and some of the science and some of the landscapes and images and even wildlife that I integrated into the story and that I just fell in love with. So first thing is, how do you get to Ilulissat, Greenland, you might be asking. So I live in St. Petersburg, Florida. So I flew from Tampa to Boston to Iceland, and then you fly from Iceland across the Greenland ice sheet to Ilulissat. You can also go through Denmark. Those are the two sort of main routes. Here's what it looks like when you're flying over Greenland. On the east coast, there are glaciers that run down from the ice sheet, and it's really cool as you're flying over. They look like they're fudge striped because of sediments that's been incorporated into the glacier. So in the book, I have a scene where they're actually in the plane flying over, and of course Luke looks out the window and says, "It looks just like fudge striped ice cream," and that's because it really did. So then you leave the east coast and then you go over the ice sheet, and it's literally just pure white for probably a couple hours, maybe 2 hours. And then you come across to the other coast and you land in Ilulissat. And it's quite a short runway. And of course, I had fun with that in the book. And when we landed, it was shrouded in clouds. We really couldn't see what it was like. And Ezzy, the main character, was like, "This is where you chose to bring us for our summer vacation, you know, Nowheresville, there's nothing here." And so you do kind of think, wow, it's pretty remote when you get there. But this is what the town or the village of Ilulissat looks like. It's really a beautiful little village. And here they have a large industry of fishing, and you can see a lot of the fishing boats in this inlet. Beautiful ancient rocks line the coast. And here's what, in fact, what my hotel looked like. And in the book, it's called the Arctic Palace. That wasn't really the name of the hotel. But one of my favorite scenes in the book, and one of the favorite things for me when I was in Greenland, was you get to the hotel, you walk through the hotel to a wall-sized window overlooking the coast, and this is what you see right from your hotel room. It was unbelievable. That's the village of Ilulissat in background, and there are giant icebergs floating by. How many places can you see that? And it's really interesting because they don't look like they're moving because they're floating or drifting so slowly. And so you actually have to watch the edge of the iceberg and line it up with something and sit there and stare at it for a little bit to see that it's actually moving. And that's where, in the scene in the book where the father comes to the window with the kids are sort of standing there in awe, and the father says, "Holy giant iceberg." But it was really how I felt when I saw it from the first time from the hotel, and I was watching to see if it was really moving. After a few minutes, you can see that it really is. Also behind the hotel were Greenland dogs. They're very important in the culture of Greenland. They are used to pull the sleds for hunting and transport. But it's also really interesting. I found I never know what tidbits I'm going to find when I travel that I'm going to integrate into the story. But one of the things I found fascinating was that in Greenland, the Greenland dog is the only breed of dog allowed in the country, because they're afraid that if they bring other types of dogs in, they'll breed and they will lose the purebred Greenland dog. So it's the only type of dog that's there. The other thing that's really interesting about them is that a couple times a day, probably often associated with feeding, when they go to feed the dogs, they'll start howling, and one will start howling, and then all across sort of the area, the village, all the dogs will start howling. And it's this very eerie sort of pleading howl. And I would encourage you after the talk maybe to go online and Google howling Greenland dogs. I couldn't find a good example to show you, but it's this really interesting sound, and they do it every day. So of course I had to put that in the story. So again, here's what the area looks like. And one of the things I do in all my books is I love maps. So I commission an illustrator to create a map that goes with the story. And here's the map from Escape Greenland, and you can see how it marries the real landscape. And just to point out, so again, there we are in Greenland. Ilulissat is just to the north of the Kangia ice fjord, that is the outflow from the glacier ice shelf. The ice shelf is the part that's floating on the ocean in the fjord. And then you go out into Disco Bay, which is essentially ocean. Now, one of the things that you can do in Ilulissat is you can go for a hike from the village out to the ice fjord. So you're hiking from Ilulissat here out across the land to the fjord. And I didn't really know what to expect. So here's what some of the hiking looks like. You're going over these big, giant gray rocks. They're very old rocks. This was in the summer, and so there's some melting, and there's also permafrost melting. Permafrost is frozen ground, and it's thawing a lot in Greenland, and so you also have some muddy areas and puddles. But so this is what the hike looks like, and you can see on the left the village in the background. Here's again another picture of what some of the hiking terrain looks like. And so, you know, you're out hiking, you don't see too much. It looks like it's going to be sort of interesting when you get to the fjord. But lo and behold, you climb up over the last ridge, and this is what you see. Oh my gosh, it was astonishing. For scale, look at the front, the foreground of that picture, and you'll see two hikers. There are, in some places, there are actually boardwalks for hiking, but you can see just how big those icebergs. Now, what's happening here is that the glacier, it forms the ice shelf. So the glacier flows over the ocean, and that's what you get, an ice shelf. So you get a big ice shelf floating on top of the ocean. And when the ice shelf breaks apart, or the glacier edge breaks apart, it creates icebergs in the fjord. And that's why it's called an ice fjord, because it's filled with icebergs. And some of the icebergs are hundreds of feet tall, big, little, all sorts of shapes and sizes. I went out for, I was like, oh, I'll just go out for a couple hours. 6 hours later, I said, I don't really have enough food for a longer hike. I better go back. I was just mesmerized. And so, of course, in the book, I have the scene where they go hiking from the village and they come upon this view. But there's another reason why the fjord is so chock full of icebergs. So if you look at this image and you look at the mouth of the ice fjord, just south of Ilulissat, you can see there are actually, from this satellite image, you can see some icebergs, right? But just to the west, just the east of where those little broken up icebergs are, is the mouth of the fjord. And it turns out that the fjord is about 1,000 feet deep. But when you get up to the fjord, there's an underwater ridge and it goes to 200 feet. It shallows dramatically. And so those giant icebergs, as they're drifting down with ocean currents, they hit that ridge and they get stuck. And then it can take days, weeks, months, even years for enough ice to melt for those icebergs to sort of lift up and flow off that undersea ridge. And so while they're sitting there, they create a traffic jam of icebergs behind them. And that's why the fjord is also so full of icebergs, because they're stuck in a traffic jam behind the ones that are stranded at the mouth. And so once they leave the fjord, they start melting more and you get all sorts of weird shapes and sizes of icebergs. I always thought of icebergs as being sort of blocky and tabular. Oh my gosh, I describe this one in the book as a fantastical Dr. Seuss iceberg. Really just amazing shapes. And so these are the ones that have escaped the fjord. If you go, now I'm going up into the fjord, this is the mouth, and this is one of the icebergs that's actually stuck on the underwater ridge. It's hundreds of feet tall. And so you see little pieces escaping around it, but this one's not going anywhere because it's stuck on the underlying ground. If you go a little bit further up, you'll see some more of it. And this looks like, you're on some land somewhere, but no, these are the icebergs that are stuck in the fjord. And there's all sorts of terrains, shapes. And again, now I'm going a little bit further back up into the fjord, and you can see again, some of the icebergs have broken up or breaking up, and you see all sort of shapes. The beginning of Escape Greenland opens up with the two characters, Ezzy and Luke, stuck in the middle of the fjord, having to I would say, go across an obstacle course of icebergs to try to get to the other side. I don't want to give away why they're there, but let's just say it's quite the adventure. Around the edges of the fjord, you can see the rocks and the grass that you can hike over. There's open water, and so a lot of times there's a little bit of open water between all the icebergs, and you see them starting to melt more. The water is incredibly clear, so you can look down into the water and see the icebergs' undersides. You can see how they melt into crazy shapes. I like the one on the left. I call those the ice shrooms, because they look like a series of mushrooms. There's always things breaking up in the fjord, and you can sit there and you can hear the ice cracking and splashes. And you have to be careful, because there are actually signs on some bays that if a big iceberg was to break up or roll over, it could create a tsunami. Or if you have a big giant calving event, it could create a tsunami. So you're not supposed to get too close. You're not supposed to get too close to the water. You also see things like this. I love this one. The one on the left, Luke, the young boy, says, it looks like it's bleeding brown blood. And as he says, creepy. And this is, remember I said that the glaciers pick up sediment as they flow towards the sea? They're rubbing against the ground and the rocks, and they wear off some of the dirt and sediment and incorporate it into the ice. Well, when it becomes an iceberg, you still have some of that sediment in it, and it makes it look brown. Well, because brown is much darker than the surrounding white ice, it absorbs the sun heat faster than the white ice, and it melts more rapidly, and so it starts streaming down the white ice with the sediment in it, and it does kind of look like brown blood. But that's just ice that has sediment in it, but it's melting faster because it's darker and it's absorbing the sun's radiation. So it's really strange. Sometimes you'll get the icebergs will turn all the way over, and that's what you see on this other picture is actually the underside of an iceberg. And there again, you can see some has incorporated a lot of sediment and rocks in it. That's the brown. The blue ice is ice with no air in it. So the white ice that you see out on all these icebergs has air bubbles in it, has a lot of air in it. But the blue ice, and this is why it's on the bottom, because over time, all the weight has compressed the ice and it's squeezed out the air. So now there's no air in that ice and it looks blue. So you have brown ice, white ice, and blue ice. The moulins, which are these big giant drainage holes on the glacier itself. And scientists are studying these to try and figure out how they transport water, meltwater from the glacier out into the fjord. And in the book, I said that the scientists, the family meets some scientists that are working on the glacier, and I made up the fact that they were using some green dye to track the meltwater to see where it goes running through these moulins and where it comes out. Well, then I found this cool picture of a scientist who had dyed the meltwater red, trying to trace or track where it flowed through the glacier and ice shelf. Well, in the real case, they never tracked where the red dyed water came out. In my case, in Escape Greenland, they discovered a river flowing under and through the glacier and the ice shelf, which was entered through by these moulins. And here's another picture of some moulins. You can just use your imagination and think, what if these were all connected to some tunnels inside the glacier? Well, people are actually now studying inside the glacier in the moulins. This is a fantastic image on the right by scientist Jason Gully, who's at USF. And what they did is they were trying to understand the volume of flow through these moulins. And usually they go there in the summer, but in the summer, there's so much meltwater rushing through, they can't go inside the moulins to really look at how big they are. So Jason and his team went to Greenland, just off of Ilulissat, and they rappelled into some moulins in the winter, or probably it was fall, probably not hard winter, but it was fall, and so there was no meltwater, and they discovered that the caverns in the moulins were much larger inside than they ever imagined. They thought they were just small chutes of water going down, and what you can see is they're huge caverns. It was an unexpected, very recent discovery. It's really cool, and kind of plays in with my idea that maybe they're all connected. And if they're all connected, what if you could go kayaking through them? That would be exciting. So you can't go kayaking in Greenland, in Ilulissat, but you can only go kayaking in Disco Bay, the ocean part, and you can't get too close to the icebergs because they could break apart. So that would be dangerous. But there I am, kayaking around an iceberg. It was fantastic. I loved it. And while we were kayaking, the guide actually picked up a piece of very transparent ice that you see on his kayak, and he chipped away at it and gave us he had brought little Dixie cups, put some of the chips in there and let us drink water. It was incredibly fresh. Again, it's transparent because there's no air in there. That's another type of ice that the air's been squeezed out. It was incredible. So of course I had to put that in the book too. But I used my imagination to think that, what if you could kayak into the Moulin on that rushing river water and down through the ice? That would be cool. They also have whales in Greenland, and humpback whales in particular are fairly common. Here see some humpbacks off of Ilulissat. And one of the things about humpbacks that I love and I used in the book is that, just like fingerprints, the underside of their tail fluke is a pattern that is specific to every whale. It's unique to every whale. And so scientists in Greenland and around the world, they actually look at the pattern of the tail to track and identify whales and see where they go and follow them. And so I had to come up with some fun names of whales based on the pattern of their tail flukes. And I'll just use your imagination if there was one called Oreo or double stuff. So I had a little bit of fun with humpback whales in the book as well. And here is a picture that I sent to the illustrator for the cover of humpback whales doing what's called bubble net feeding. And what they do is, when they're submerged, they blow air out of their blowholes. In a pod will do this in a ring. And as the air bubbles rise to the surface, they act like a net around small fish and zooplankton and congregate them all up towards the surface. And then the humpbacks all swim up with their mouths open and grab a mouthful. And here is a fantastic picture. You can even see, look at all the fish all around the surface that these whales are gobbling up in mouthfuls. Well, in the story, I think it's one of my favorite scenes is Ezzy and Luke are in a small boat and humpback whales come up bubble net feeding all around them. And that's what the illustrator captured in this cover image, which I just love. Let's just say it was a very bad day for Ezzy's phone. One of my favorite parts, another part of my favorite parts of the book, is in the back of Escape Galapagos and Escape Greenland. I have a section called Real versus Made Up. And some of you who may have come to my last lecture about Galapagos may remember this section. And it was so popular with my readers and with audiences, I decided to expand it a little bit in Escape Greenland. And what it is, I give some things that happen in the book or in Greenland, and I ask the readers to I ask them, is it based on real science or did I make it up? And so I'm going to read you a couple, and I want you guys all at home. I can't see you necessarily, but I want you to raise your hand when you think it's real versus made up. So here's an easy one. The Jacobsen Glacier is one of the fastest flowing rivers of ice in the world. Well, I already told you that one, so we know that's real. How about this is a good one. The iceberg that sank the Titanic was shed from the Kangia ice fjord. How many of you think that's real? Did the iceberg that sank the Titanic come from this fjord in Greenland? Real or made up? That is real. The icebergs that come out of the fjord get caught in currents, and they actually first go north, then they track around it and they go south, and they have been tracked as far south as the same latitude as New Jersey. And so they think that that came from this glacier. Here's another one. Where the icebergs are big enough and flat, you can go hiking across them. No, I made that up. It is very dangerous. You cannot do that. Let's see. Scientists rappel into the moulins to deploy instruments under the ice. you know that's real. So that's just to give you a flavor. But I had a lot of fun integrating real science and so much of the mesmerizing landscapes and the things that I saw when I was there in Ilulissat, Greenland. I still just can't get over it. And in fact, I really want to go back. One of the things I also put in there that you have to warn you about is mosquitoes. They have giant, big, lots of mosquitoes. And so you have to sort of be prepared for that. That's the only negative I can think of. Otherwise, it's a fantastic place. And so now I'm going to open it up for questions, but I just want to say, if you're interested in getting these books, they're targeted towards middle graders, but even adults tell me that they learn from them. You can order them online or in stores from any of your favorite booksellers. And if they don't have them, you can just ask them to order them through their distributors. And you can, if you want to contact me or follow me, you can get through me on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. I love hearing questions from readers or comments. It's kind of what inspires me to keep writing. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open up to questions. So any questions?
So Ellen, we have some that have been ready for you, and just remind the audience, Wyatt has just put the slide back up. You can go to the bottom of your screen, and in the Q&A, you can type in any questions. So here we go. And I usually take them in order.
I'm ready.
The first one is, well, this is really just a comment, but from Michelle. She says, "Hello, Dr. Prager. I can't wait to read the second book in the series." And I think you have told us that basically the usual outlets online, it's pretty easy to find. Just Google the name of the book or the author and the name of the book, and it comes up really quick. Terrence has asked, interesting question, are fossils found in Greenland?
Are fossils found in Greenland? I think there are some plant fossils, spores and things like that. There's not a lot of animals in Greenland. It is a very harsh environment. The animals that you find there right now are things like musk ox. And I was recently told, I didn't see one there, but I was recently told you do not want to run into a musk ox. Reindeers, fox, there's little like moles. There are very few animals. There's a lot of fish, there are seals, but on land, there are not a lot of animals. So I don't think it's a very rich place in fossils. There are very ancient rocks that are actually before you had a lot of life on Earth. But in terms of fossils of animals, I don't think there's a lot. It is a very harsh place. I will tell you, it's a tough place. Those Greenlanders are tough people. When I was there was 24-hour sun. The sun never went down. And, we call it the midnight sun. It was kind of dim, but in the winter, they have 24-hour darkness and it is cold. So it's a rough place. In Ilulissat on the coast there weren't even any trees, no trees. It's tough.
So let's see. The next one is from Jay, and he says, "What is the population of Greenland and the village that you visited?"
Oh, Jay, that's a great question, and unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you. I'm sure if you looked online and said population of Ilulissat, it would come up really quick. It's not huge though. I can guarantee you that it's not very big.
More dogs or people?
More people.
More people,
especially now.
And really, Ellen did tell me the other day that I should go online and learn about these dogs. And if you do Google Greenland dogs, you can hear them all howling if you're really curious about that.
That's cool.
I did that. She talked me into it, and I did it. Okay, I think both of you and I both know this next gentleman, okay. Mel Briscoe. Does that sound ring a bell?
Mel Briscoe.
How are you, Mel?
Oh, old friend.
He goes, "Where is the next adventure going to be? How can you top this?"
Oh, Mel, that's a really good question. And I can't give it away. That's always a surprise, but I will give you a hint. For Mel, you and Dennis know me very well. I'll tell you a little bit of backstory. I was going to have the third place on the Wonder List be Australia's Great Barrier Reef. but because of the pandemic, I couldn't go. And I really like to go and spend time anywhere I'm going to write, incorporate, because you find all these gems and things. So I couldn't go. Well, so I made that part of the story. I've been working on it, and that's going to be part of the story. So it had to be someplace where I have spent a lot of time. That would be exciting, and I could integrate science. I'm going to leave it there. It's
Okay, I got a pretty good idea, but I don't want to, since you spoiled it. You said you didn't want anybody to spoil it. I think I know, but I won't.
Good question. So nice to hear from Mel. Oh.
It is. Okay, next one is, let's see. What is the book Dangerous Earth you showed in the last slide?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. So right as the pandemic hit, terrible timing to get a book coming out called Dangerous Earth. I published a popular science book with Chicago Press called Dangerous Earth, What We Wish We Knew About Climate Change, Hurricanes, Volcanoes. And I spent a couple of years actually doing research for this book. And so it's about what do scientists wish they knew about things like climate change and hurricanes and volcanoes. Not necessarily everything we know, but what are those big questions that drive research, or what are the things that get these guys up in the morning to do their work? It was really fascinating. And one of the things that came out of that was all the glaciologists that I talked to for the climate change section in Dangerous Earth all said they wish they understood how big ice sheets and glaciers melted, that big process. That was a big thing. And an interesting point, some of the big questions in science have to do with things we can't see. So we can't see under the ice. We can't see under volcanoes. Volcanologists just wish they could see the plumbing. They wish they knew what the plumbing of the volcano was. Earthquake scientists wish they could see faults, but they're underground. So there was a really kind of running theme that developed as I did research for the book. So it's about what do we wish we knew? What are the big questions in things like climate change, volcanoes? And again, that book is available online too, written in easy language, kind of the same style that I always write.
So the next question is, so the village you were at, what other industries are there besides fishing? I mean, what else do the people do? How do they make a living?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the growing industries, I bet you can guess, is tourism. Especially they call it climatourism. Climatourism, yeah. People coming to see climate change firsthand. So tourism, fishing, there's a geothermal plant. So geothermal, there are people employed there. And then there are support services for everybody else. Hunting and fishing, hunting used to be big, but it's less and less now. Also, they're having problems with it's not as safe on the ice anymore because of melting and the thawing of permafrost. But yeah, there's not a lot of industry. And in fact, it's really hard there. There's not a lot of food. And so that's grown there. There's no plants. So they have to import a lot. So again, it's really tough.
And it's considered a territory of Denmark?
I believe it used to be Denmark used to own it. I think right. It's either a territory or it's independent now. Okay. But yeah, there are definitely Danish overtones while you're there. And people speak some people speak Danish, but most speak Greenlandish. And don't ask me to speak.
It's a lot of howling, probably, right?
It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, it must be really interesting. There's really a lot of people who, their roots go very, very far back. Another question was, how far do icebergs float into the ocean?
Good question. So once they escape the ice fjord, as I said, they float and they melt as they float. So it depends on how big they are, right, and when they get out of the ice fjord. But they can go as far south latitudes as New Jersey. So really, thousands of miles, because it can take years for them to melt when they're giant icebergs. it's really surprising when I took a boat up to another glacier and you go by all these icebergs that are just floating by, and and they're all different shapes and sizes, but the really big ones, they can actually last for years.
So, it might, this is really coming from me, but I thought people would want to know this.
Yeah.
So, when there's sea ice, and we all know that sea ice is disappearing from the Arctic, for example, but then there's glaciers that are on land, like Greenland, like Antarctica, and when they melt and that water goes to the ocean, there's actually a huge difference between the two impacts. Would you just mind explaining to people
Sure.
how
Well,
why it's such a big difference? Because if you look at the models are sea ice does this, but
right. So no, and actually this is something I do actually bring this up in the book.
Yeah.
So if the ice, or snow for that matter, but if the ice is on land and it travels to the sea and melts, you're adding volume. So you get sea level rise. If you have an ice shelf or sea ice that's floating on the ocean and it melts, it doesn't raise the volume. So it has to be land-based, glacier or ice sheet that flows to the ocean, melts, and it raises sea level. And so think about this. If we don't know exactly how these big ice sheets and glaciers are melting, what does that mean? We don't know exactly how fast and how far sea level is going to rise. Exactly. Thank you. Thank you for, I meant to talk about that, so I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, I would have thought that would probably, have been in the book.
Oh yeah, it's in there. It's in there. There are some fun word plays on sea level rise that I don't want to give away.
So we may want to think about this next question, and we may
Okay.
want to figure out how we could really execute this really well. And you're going to need somebody like me to help you with this.
I have a feeling I know what that question is.
Security. This is actually from Barbara, and she is one of the couple that, you see the name, and this is Barbara Ferreira, and she asked, and I think you met her in December 2019 when you came by. I think we met. And will you lead a tour to the Greenland glaciers? We want to go. I'm sure you get people right now to come and go.
I know, basically, I've had a lot of people ask me that, and I would love to do it. Yeah. Now once the pandemic is behind us, it's something that I actually want to do. I have a lot of friends that want to go. I have family that want to go. I would actually love to do that, and I think the way I did it is I went to Greenland for like 4 or 5 days, and then I stopped in Iceland for 3 days. And so it was, a little bit over a week or so, and I could go longer, but that was a fantastic trip. So count me in, let's put it together. You guys, maybe if you guys want to help with the logistics, I'm in.
Well, I'll tell you what, Barbara and I will not forget this. I just want you to know that if it's family only, once you get 4 lectures in the series, we consider you Harvard Branch family. Okay. So here's another one. Do you ever anticipate, okay, this is a good question too. Do you ever anticipate the glaciers expanding in size? The glacier melt looks similar to what I've seen in Alaska. It's been progressing for well north of 100 years. So do you ever see, probably not in our lifetimes, but do you ever see at some point, or if you take the big picture, might this ever turn around?
Yeah, in the big picture, if we get climate change under control and the Earth cycles back into a cold phase, sure, the glaciers are going to expand. There's also some things we don't understand completely, where you may on a local scale have heavier snow somewhere, and so you might locally get one glacier expanding where everything else is retreating, and that's one reason it's more complicated. But I don't think in my lifetime, and I don't think until we do more about climate change, we're going to see that happening.
Okay, let's see. There was a question that was about what language. We already talked about that.
Greenlandish.
So, and we asked a little bit about organisms, but this is very specific now. What about the birds there? What about the shorebirds, the pelagic birds?
There's not a lot. I only saw a couple. I didn't go all over Greenland, so I shouldn't say that. I'm sure in some areas there might be more, but I only saw a couple kind of gulls and maybe terns. But that was about it. Again, it's a tough place for any animal. One of the things about Greenland is, and this is this sort of juxtaposition with Iceland, Greenland is almost all ice sheet. There's only around the coast is that open land, and there's very little vegetation. Iceland, on the other hand, there's very little ice and it's all mostly green. So, there's this joke that Iceland should be called Greenland and Greenland should be called Iceland. But I did read in a history book, because I try and do a lot of research about these places as well, that the person who named it Greenland did it so more people would go there.
Yeah, I read that.
Not because it's really Greenland, but because he wanted more people to go.
Don't we have a military presence there?
I don't know if we still do. We used to. There was a military base that they built up on the ice, actually.
Right. Yeah, I kind of remember that. So it's an interesting question. We got a lot of really good questions, by the way.
Yeah, these are great.
Great audience. I'm guessing you didn't see the Northern Lights since it was 24-hour sun, but when it does come night, what about the Northern Lights? Can we see them if we go?
You can see the Northern Lights in Greenland. I did not see them because I was not there at the right time of year. But that's another thing I would love to do, is to go back and see that. That would be really great.
Okay. Now you might have to put your science hat on again.
Uh-oh.
And
You're making me nervous. I can do it.
You can. How can science prove the meltdowns to man-made actions to the environment and not a process of natural evolution that repeats itself every millions of years? So, all climate scientists have to address this all the time.
Right. Well,
so how do we know who?
Okay. So first thing I will tell you is I spent a lot of time in my book on Dangerous Earth, in the section on climate change. I explained this, I hope, extremely clearly. We have a lot of evidence now showing that it is man-made fossil fuels primarily that have put the excess carbon dioxide into the environment, into the atmosphere, that is driving climate change. So a couple points that are important to know. It's not the exact temperature, the absolute temperature that's the issue. It's the accelerated pace of warming that is unusual. And there's a couple ways we know this. One way is that there's I would say, refer you to my book, Dangerous Earth, but I'll just tell you that there are a thing called carbon isotopes, and you can tell where the carbon comes from by the isotope. And we can actually analyze the air, and we can tell that the isotopes, the type of carbon that's there, are from burning of fossil fuels, because plants have a certain kind of carbon in them. And so that's one way. We can also go and look at what we call proxies and look at when the carbon dioxide acceleration started and how that compares to previous times and what was happening at the same time on land. So we have very good data now. And it comes from the ocean, it comes from the air, it comes from the ice, it comes from pollen spores. It comes from these isotopes. And they all say the same thing, that the accelerated pace of warming is due to the excess carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. But I will refer you to Dangerous Earth, because I think I spent a lot of time trying to make that very understandable, because I think it's such an important question.
So there's a couple questions that are kind of followed up to what we've just been talking about, and sea level rise and stuff. One of them is, as the ice is melting from the land, is the ocean level rising to a point where that little village that you were at might start to be threatened? A lot of islands out in the Pacific where they're very low do. What about there?
Well, it's kind of complicated, because this is really interesting to think about. So yes, they certainly have to worry about sea level rise, but it would have to be pretty high to the village. But as the ice is removed from the land in Greenland and in places like Iceland, you actually get something called rebound, because you're taking weight off the land and it actually rises. So the land there is actually also getting higher. So they have less of a problem than some of the Pacific islands that never had ice on them. Mm-hmm. So that's called, a local sea level rise versus global sea level rise. So the rebound is happening in Greenland, the land is actually rising. But yeah, if the Greenland ice sheet and Antarctic ice sheets were to fully melt, or even like 10% melt, they would have a problem. And they also have a big problem with permafrost thaw. A lot of the permafrost in Greenland is thawing. And so, in fact, when you're driving, the roads go like this. And it's the same thing. You can see that in Alaska. And that's because of permafrost thawing. The ground that's frozen is thawing and getting all mushy. And so they have a problem with structures and roads collapsing. So I think that's going to be a sooner problem than sea level rise is for them.
What about volcanoes? Are there volcanoes, even dormant ones, in Greenland? What do you know about that?
I don't know very much about it, but I don't think so. I didn't see any evidence in the rocks, and I didn't read anything about that, suggesting that there was, but I don't like to say, never say never. So as far as I know, no, but that could be wrong. It's not like Iceland. Iceland has volcanoes for two reasons. One, it's a hot spot like Hawaii, plus it sits right over the mid-ocean ridge that you have two plates moving apart. But yeah, one of the coolest things I did in Iceland, I went snorkeling in the rift between the two plates pulling apart. Oh my gosh, it was freezing cold, but very cool.
Okay, we have another one that's more biological. Did you see walruses and seals or anything similar when you were in Greenland?
I didn't see walruses. I don't know if they have walruses in Greenland, but they definitely have seals. I saw evidence of seals and I was looking for them numerous times, but I didn't see any. And the people in the village told me that it's much harder to find seals now. Because of the thawing, the melting ice, and also because they've been hunted, and so they're much more skittish. But I didn't see any there. But they do. They definitely have them, and I saw them in Iceland.
What about polar bears? Do polar bears get to Greenland?
They certainly have some polar bears in Greenland. There weren't any where I was, but they're certainly, I think, to the north they have them.
Yeah. So if there's any other questions, I'll say go ahead and type them. I see one more just came in, but let me throw one more out to you. So as a scientist, I really admire the fact that you can communicate and that you're writing books for middle-aged kids. Is that I'm sure it's challenging, but how did you get into deciding middle age was the sweet spot?
Middle grade. So
for you to write.
I appreciate that question, Dennis. So I'd written younger kids books, which are like 4 to 7, like illustrated books, and I had done popular science, which tends to be high school and above. And I actually had kids and teachers and parents say to me, hey, you haven't done anything for middle graders. It's a really important age. It's really important to get them engaged in science, enjoying reading. They're starting to figure out what they want to do as a career or their interests. And so they really impressed upon me how important an age it was. And it's so critical to get them reading and engaged in science. And so I did a little homework to see what they liked at that age and discovered it was these fiction series, these fun fiction series that was really what they liked to read. And so that inspired me to start writing adventure fiction series for middle graders that integrate science. And what I like about it is that you have parents reading with the kids. And so they're learning too. And I made sure some of the humor and things in the books that adults would like as well, and that the adults could learn from the books as well, because I knew they'd be reading it together. And I will tell you, it's been one of the most rewarding things I've done in my career. The reaction from the kids and the parents and the educators has been so good. I mean, I've had kids come up and give me hugs. They've passed me secret notes. They send me funny notes. One parent sent me a note, said that their kid got caught in their classroom reading my book under the desk and got in trouble, but it was okay because he was reading.
Well, I did read your first book, and I plan to read your second book. I enjoyed it, and I know, the young folks that I know in my family that read it enjoyed it. And I think the key thing there is that, it's not really a science book.
Right.
It's a lot of science in there, but like you said, I think it's the storytelling. So the kids like the storytelling. They like characters of their own age.
Right.
And I think also they like a series because they want another one.
Right.
So, we know you're not going to tell us exactly what the next book is about, but can we expect one, say, in 2020?
I don't know. I will tell you, I've got it started. I've got some really fun ideas with it, but I've still got a lot of work to do on it. I got to buckle down. But yeah, the other thing I love in the books is humor. And I will tell you, there's a really funny part at the end of the Escape Greenland where they go on a planet walk. It's a hike where there's planets, and they go from one planet to the next that they develop to engage people in learning. And it's based on a planet walk I did in Alaska. And I'll just tell you, there's a very funny scene when the father says, "What's the next planet?" And the kid looks down at the map and starts laughing. And the father's like, "What? What's so funny?" He goes, "We're going to Uranus." And I'll just leave it at that. Many jokes go on, but I did a planet hike in Alaska, and the same thing happened. And oh my gosh, there was just too much laughing going on. So I had to put that in the book too.
Okay, there's one comment I'll pass, and then there's going to be one more question. Maybe that might be it. We'll see if anything else comes in. So there's going to be last call here soon. So we have Michelle, and we were just having a dialogue about middle school.
Right.
So she wrote, "Yes!" exclamation point. And middle school, she teaches middle school. So middle school age is a great audience to reach. I'm a middle school science teacher, so.
Oh, well, thanks. I'm so glad
I think you got some affirmation there on that point. Okay, there's two questions that kind of I'm going to web together. Okay. So given the harsh environment, is there much agriculture or other fruits and veggies, or all fruits and veggies imported? And then the question right after it is, with geothermal energy and improved lighting, are there any greenhouses for fresh food?
So, no is the answer on agriculture, at least in Aleutian. I've heard that to the south, on the southwest coast, that they're trying to do some little more farming, but in the area of Aleutian, there is no agriculture. I mean, you were lucky if you went out to a restaurant. You were lucky if you could order a salad, because I think the only thing green was lettuce that they imported. There are no vegetables or fruits, very hard to come by. All of that is imported. But I think they're trying to work on agriculture to the south. And my guess is you're probably right. It's probably with greenhouses.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be a very interesting industry there.
Okay, well, it's a little bit after 5, and you had a whole bunch of questions. And
oh yeah, they were great.
It's so nice that you allowed so much time for that. And I know that's, as speakers, we oftentimes enjoy that dialogue more than anything. And if anybody's interested in the book, again, what you got to do is Google Ellen Prager and say Greenland, an exclamation point. You don't need the exclamation point, but it probably gets you there just a little quicker. And then it's there. And really, I think if you know anybody in that age group, and probably a little younger and a little older, you can read it first and then give it away. That's the
way to go.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ellen. And whenever that next book does come out, we'll be here.
Okay.
We'll be back together in the Johnson Education Center. And, at that point, you'll have the books and everybody can come up and meet you in person. So,
well, I love that part of it. So that would be great. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody for coming, and hope to see most of you again next month.